The social worker's car smelled like artificial vanilla and broken promises. She didn't look at me when she said it, just kept her eyes on the highway as the wipers fought against October rain that had no intention of stopping. "You're 21 now, Marcus. That's it, no extensions, no grace period. The group home needs your bed by Friday." Friday was 3 days away. I had a duffel bag with clothes that didn't fit right, a phone with 2 months left on a prepaid plan, and $73 in my pocket that I'd saved from stocking shelves at a grocery store that fired me for missing shifts when my caseworker needed signatures. The system doesn't teach you how to leave. It just opens the door one morning and expects you to know where to go. I didn't know where to go. I had no family, no godparents who'd forgotten to show up, no distant cousin who felt guilty enough to offer a couch. I was a file that had been passed between hands for 19 years until those hands finally decided I was someone else's problem. The rain turned everything outside into a watercolor that bled at the edges. We drove past strip malls with letters missing from their signs, past apartment complexes with balconies stacked like cages, past the kind of motels where you pay by the week and pretend not to hear what happens in the next room. "There's a shelter downtown," she said, and I could hear the apology she didn't have time to actually give. "They do intake until 9. I can drop you there after we finish the exit paperwork." Exit paperwork. Like I was being discharged from a hospital instead of being shoved out of the only structure I'd ever known. That's when her phone rang. She answered on the car's Bluetooth, and a man's voice filled the space between us like smoke. "Miss Chen? This is Robert Callahan from Callahan and Moore. I've been trying to reach Marcus Webb." She glanced at me, confused. I shrugged. I didn't know any lawyers. "He's here," she said carefully. "What's this regarding?" There was a pause, the kind that makes you hold your breath without meaning to. "I'm calling about an estate matter. Marcus is listed as the sole heir to a property in Grafton, Pennsylvania. We need him to come in and sign some documents." I felt my stomach drop. Sole heir, property. Those words didn't belong in a sentence about me. "There must be a mistake," I said, leaning toward the dashboard. "I don't have any family." "According to our records," the lawyer said, and his voice had the practiced patience of someone who'd said this many times before. "The property belonged to Samuel and Lorraine Webb, your paternal grandparents. They passed away 6 months ago. The will was very specific. Everything goes to you. Samuel and Lorraine Webb." I turned those names over in my mind like stones I'd found at the bottom of a river. I'd seen them once, written on a form when I was 12, in a section labeled "Known Relatives, No Contact." No one had ever explained why there was no contact. No one had ever explained much of anything. Miss Chen pulled into a gas station and put the car in park. She looked at me with something close to wonder, like I'd just told her I could fly. "Marcus, this could change everything." It could. Or it could be another door that opened onto nothing. But nothing was all I had anyway, so I nodded. "Where's Grafton?" 2 days later, I stood in a lawyer's office that smelled like leather and old paper, signing documents I didn't fully understand, while Robert Callahan explained things in a voice that assumed I knew what probate meant. The property was a farm, 22 acres, a house, a barn, some outbuildings. It had been abandoned for months, and there were liens against it for unpaid taxes and utility bills that had stacked up like fallen dominoes. "You could sell it?" Callahan said, sliding a business card across his desk. "I know a developer who's been buying up land in that area. You'd clear maybe 15, 20,000 after the debts are settled. That's not nothing for someone in your position." Someone in my position. I wondered what position that was. Desperate? Disposable? The kind of person who should be grateful for crumbs? I took the deed instead. It was a single piece of paper that said I owned something, that I belonged to a place even if that place didn't want me. Ms. Chen had already moved on to her next case. The group home had already given my bed to a kid who looked at me with the same hollow eyes I'd had at 15. I took a Greyhound bus that rattled like a skeleton and smelled like industrial cleaner, and I watched Pennsylvania unfold outside the window in shades of rust and grey. Grafton was the kind of town that had been left behind by everything except the weather. Main Street had more shuttered storefronts than open ones. The diner looked like it was held together by grease and habit. I asked the bus driver where Hickory Road was, and he pointed west without looking up from his phone. "Past the old mill. You'll know it when the pavement stops." The pavement stopped after 2 miles. Hickory Road became gravel, then dirt, then just 2 ruts carved into mud that grabbed at my shoes with every step. I walked for an hour as the afternoon leaked away into something colder and sharper. The trees pressed close, their branches stripped bare by wind that tasted like smoke. I almost missed it. The mailbox was leaning so far it looked drunk, and the name Webb had been painted over but not quite erased. You could still see the letters if you knew to look. The driveway was less a driveway and more a suggestion, weeds tall enough to scrape my jeans as I walked. And then I saw it, the house. It sat at the end of the dirt lane like something that had given up. The roof sagged in the middle, tiles missing like knocked-out teeth. The porch had collapsed on one side, the wood grey and splintered. Windows were dark, some broken, some covered with boards that had warped with time. The barn behind it leaned hard to the left, its red paint peeling in long strips that curled like dried skin. This was mine, this ruin, this grave for a life I'd never been invited to live. I stood there with my duffel bag pulling at my shoulder and the last of the daylight dying behind the tree line, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, not yet, but something close, something that moved inside me like a question I didn't know how to ask. The front door was unlocked. It opened with a sound like a sigh. The inside of the house smelled like time had come here to rot. Mildew and dust and something underneath that might have been lavender once. Sachets left in drawers by a woman who believed in making things nice, even when everything else was falling apart. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step announcing me to a place that didn't know I existed. The living room was mostly empty, a couch with springs pushing through fabric like broken ribs, a coffee table with rings from glasses that had been set down and forgotten. The walls were bare except for the ghosts of frames, rectangles of wallpaper less faded than the rest, proof that photographs had hung there once before someone took them down. I wondered if those photographs had included me, if somewhere in this house there was evidence that Samuel and Lorraine Webb had known they had a grandson, had cared enough to keep a picture, had thought about me even once before they died, and left me everything they couldn't carry. The kitchen was worse. Dishes in the sink, dried food crusted on plates. A calendar on the wall stopped at March, 6 months ago, the day circled in red pen with no note to explain why. The refrigerator door hung open, its inside black with mold. I closed it quickly and tried not to breathe too deep. There was a table with 2 chairs, and on that table, a manila envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting. Marcus Webb. I sat down and opened it. Inside was a letter, 3 pages. The ink smudged in places like whoever wrote it had been crying or hadn't been able to hold the pen steady. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, cramped and urgent, the words pressed hard into the paper. "Marcus," it began, and just seeing my name written by someone who'd known me before I knew myself made my throat tight. "If you're reading this, it means we ran out of time. We tried to find you. We tried for years. The state wouldn't tell us where you were. They said it was better that way, that your mother had made her wishes clear before she died, that we had no legal right because we hadn't been there when it mattered. They were right about that last part. We weren't there, and I'm sorry. Your grandfather wanted to fight harder, wanted to hire lawyers and make noise, but I was afraid. Afraid we'd make things worse for you, afraid you'd been placed somewhere good, and we'd ruin it by showing up with our mess. Because we had a mess, Marcus. This farm, this life, it was beautiful once, but we let it slip. We held on too long to things that should have been let go, and by the time we understood that, it was too late to fix it. But we didn't forget you. We thought about you every single day. And when the doctor told your grandfather he had maybe 6 months, he made me promise something. He made me promise that if we couldn't find you before we died, we'd leave you the farm. Not because it's worth much, though maybe it could be if you're smarter than we were, but because it's the only thing we have that says you came from somewhere, that you belong to a place, that you're not alone in the way you think you are. I stopped reading and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw colors. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to ball up the letter and throw it across the room and scream at these people who'd thought about me every day but never found me, who'd left me a collapsing house and a pile of debt instead of showing up when it would have actually mattered. But I couldn't get angry. I was too tired, and anger takes energy I didn't have. So I kept reading. "There's something you need to know," the letter continued. "Something we couldn't put in the will because it's not exactly legal. Your grandfather found something on this property 30 years ago when he was digging a new well. He found a box, old metal, sealed with wax. Inside were coins, gold coins, more than we'd ever seen in our lives. He reported it like you're supposed to, called the county, called a museum, but they said because it was found on private property and there was no way to trace the original owner, it was ours to keep. We didn't keep it all. We sold some to pay off the farm, to help neighbors who were drowning during the recession, to do some good, because having that much while others had so little felt wrong. But we kept enough. We hid it because people talk, and greed makes people do ugly things. Your grandfather made a map. It's hidden in the barn in the rafters above the third stall. There's a tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside is the map and a key. Follow the map, Marcus. Use what you find to save this place or to save yourself. Either way, it's yours. It's always been yours. We love you. We're sorry we couldn't say it to your face. Lorraine Webb. I sat there until the light outside turned blue and then black, until I couldn't see the words on the page anymore, until the cold in the house seeped into my bones and made me shiver. A map. A key. Gold hidden somewhere on this land like a fairy tale. Like something that happened to other people in other lives. I should have been skeptical. I should have thought it was dementia or wishful thinking or a sick joke. But I wasn't skeptical. I was desperate. And desperate people believe in things that don't make sense, because sense has never done them any favors. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I stood up, grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The barn was waiting. The wind had picked up, pushing through the gaps in the house with a low moan that sounded almost like words. I stepped out onto the sagging porch and looked toward the barn. It was darker than the sky, a black shape against deep blue, and every instinct I had told me to wait until morning, to not go stumbling into a structure that might collapse with the wrong step. But morning felt too far away. Morning meant time to think, time to talk myself out of this, time to remember that treasure maps and hidden gold were the kinds of things that happened in stories, not to kids who aged out of the system with nothing but lint in their pockets. So I walked. The grass was tall and wet, soaking through my jeans. The barn door was half off its hinges, hanging at an angle that made it look like a mouth caught mid-scream. I pulled it open far enough to slip through, and the smell hit me immediately. Rotted hay, old manure, something sweet and chemical that might have been fertilizer gone bad. My phone's light cut through the darkness in a thin beam that made everything outside it feel heavier, more present, like the shadows were watching. The third stall was at the back. The door hung open, the wood split and splintered. I stepped inside and looked up. The rafters were high, thick beams crossed with cobwebs that swayed in the draft. I couldn't see a tin box. I couldn't see anything but wood and dust and the skeletal shapes of tools hanging from nails. I would need a ladder. I would need daylight. I would need to not be doing this alone in a barn that could collapse and bury me before anyone knew I was missing. But then my light caught something. A mark carved into the beam directly above me. It was crude, done with a knife or a nail, but unmistakable. An arrow pointing west. I followed it. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a story about finding gold. It's about finding yourself when you've been lost your whole life. If stories like this pull at something in your chest, If you believe that the things we inherit aren't always what we expect, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything? Drop your story below. I read every single one, and trust me, you're not alone in this. Now let's get back to that barn, because what I found next wasn't just a map, it was a choice. The arrow led to another beam, and that beam had another arrow, and I followed them like breadcrumbs left by a man who knew he was running out of time. The last arrow pointed down, toward a corner where the wall met the floor, where hay bales had rotted into dark, compressed blocks that crumbled when I touched them. I pulled them away, one handful at a time, until my fingers hit something hard. Metal. I dug faster, hay dust filling my nose and mouth, until I could grip the edges and pull. A tin box, just like the letter said, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it dry despite everything. It was smaller than I expected, the size of a shoebox, but heavy. I sat back on my heels and peeled away the cloth. The lid was rusted at the edges but intact, and when I pried it open, the hinges screamed. Inside, folded tight, was a piece of paper that had been drawn on with careful precision. A map of the property, hand-sketched, with landmarks labelled in that same shaky handwriting. The house. The barn. A creek I hadn't seen yet. A cluster of trees marked old growth, and in 3 places small X's drawn in red ink. Beside each X, a number. 3 feet, 5 feet, 4 feet, depths. Beneath the map was a key, iron, old, the kind that looked like it belonged to a chest in a pirate movie. And beneath the key, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, were 3 coins. They caught my phone's light and threw it back gold, pure and bright, with edges that had been worn smooth by time. I picked one up. It was heavier than a quarter, stamped with a profile I didn't recognize, and a date I could barely read. 18-something. I turned it over in my fingers and felt the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the weight of what it meant. This was real. My grandparents hadn't been lying or confused or lost in fantasy. They'd hidden something, and they'd left me the tools to find it. I sat there in the dark barn with hay in my hair and dirt under my nails, holding proof that I'd come from people who'd planned for me, who'd thought about my future even when they couldn't be part of it. And for the first time since I'd left the group home, since I'd stood in that lawyer's office signing papers I didn't understand, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel. I felt like I mattered. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I went back to the house and cleared a space on the living room floor, spread out the map, and studied it by the light of my phone until the battery dropped to 15%. The first X was closest to the barn, near the old growth trees. The second was by the creek, which according to the map ran along the southern edge of the property. The third was near the house, in what looked like an overgrown garden plot. 3 places, 3 depths. I didn't know how much gold was buried in each spot, but I knew it was enough, that my grandparents had been careful about it, had hidden it and mapped it and kept it secret for decades. And I knew that if I could find it, if I could dig it up and figure out what to do with it, I might actually have a chance, not just to pay off the debts on this place, not just to keep the developers Robert Callahan mentioned from turning it into something unrecognizable, but to build something. To prove that I wasn't just a kid who'd aged out with nothing, that I could take what I'd been given and make it mean something. But I also knew I wasn't alone in knowing about this. The letter had said, people talk, that greed makes people do ugly things. If my grandparents had sold some of the gold years ago, there would be records, rumors, people who remembered, people who might have been waiting for Samuel and Lorraine to die so they could come looking. I thought about Robert Callahan and the way he'd mentioned a developer so quickly, like it was the obvious choice, the only choice. I thought about how easy it would be for someone with resources to find out about a 21-year-old with no money and no family who'd just inherited a property he couldn't afford to keep. I thought about how easy it would be to wait until I was desperate enough to sell, and then to offer just enough to make me think I was getting a deal. I needed to move fast. I needed to dig before anyone else figured out what I was doing. At first light, I went into town. Grafton's main street looked even sadder in the daylight, the buildings leaning into each other like old men who'd given up on standing straight. I found a hardware store that was half empty but still open, run by a man with a grey beard and suspicious eyes. I bought a shovel, a pickaxe, work gloves, and a tarp, paying with the last of my $73 and the emergency credit card Ms. Chen had helped me get before I left the system. The man didn't ask what I needed the tools for. He just rang me up and handed me the receipt without making eye contact. I wondered if he knew who I was, if small towns worked the way they did in movies, where everyone knew everything about everyone. I wondered if he knew about the Webbs, about the farm, about the grandson who'd shown up out of nowhere to claim something he'd never earned. I walked back the 2 miles to Hickory Road with the shovel over my shoulder and the other tools clanking in a bag, and by the time I reached the property, my shoulders ached and my hands were blistered. But I didn't stop. I went straight to the barn, grabbed the map, and headed for the old-growth trees. The first X was 20 paces north of the largest oak, at the base of a maple that had split down the middle, one half dead and one half clinging to life. I measured it out, marked the spot with a stick, and started digging. The ground was hard at first, clay mixed with rock, and every swing of the pickaxe sent shocks up my arms. But I kept going, sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold, until the pickaxe hit something that rang instead of thudded. Metal. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the dirt with my gloved hands, pulling away rocks and roots until I could see the edge of a box. It was the size of a toolbox, made of iron, rusted but intact. I pried it free from the earth and dragged it up onto the top. The lid was locked, but the iron key from the tin box slid into the lock like it had been made for it. I turned the key. The lock clicked. I opened the lid. Gold. Not just coins this time, but bars, small ones, the kind you see in movies stacked in vaults. There were maybe a dozen of them, each one stamped with a mint mark and a weight. And beneath the bars, wrapped in more cloth, were letters, old letters, dozens of them tied with string. I didn't read them. Not yet. I closed the box, wrapped it in the tarp, and carried it back to the house. My arms shook with the weight, and my mind raced with calculations I didn't know how to make. How much was this worth? Thousands, tens of thousands, enough to pay off the liens, enough to fix the roof, enough to turn this ruin into something livable. I didn't know. But I knew I needed help. I knew I couldn't do this alone, and I knew that asking for help meant trusting someone, and trust was something I'd learned not to give freely. I was sitting on the porch, trying to catch my breath, when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A truck, old and loud, pulling into the driveway. I stood up fast, heart hammering, and watched as it stopped near the mailbox. The door opened, and a man got out. He was maybe 50, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans stained with something dark, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite friendly, not quite hostile. Curious maybe, or cautious. "You the Webb kid?" he called out, not moving closer. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He studied me for a long moment, then spit into the dirt. "Heard you were here. Name's Daniel Pritchard. I own the land next to yours, about a mile east. Your granddad and I used to trade equipment, help each other out during harvest." He paused, then added, "I'm sorry about Sam and Lorraine. They were good people, better than most." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded again. Daniel looked past me toward the house, toward the barn, and something shifted in his expression. "You planning to stay?" he asked. "Or you just here to sell?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know. Staying meant fixing a house that looked like it would cost more to repair than it was worth. Staying meant figuring out how to live on land I didn't know how to work, in a town where I didn't know anyone, with skills I didn't have. But selling meant walking away from the only thing I'd ever inherited, the only proof that I'd come from somewhere, that I wasn't just a case number in a filing cabinet somewhere. "I'm thinking about it," I said finally. Daniel nodded slowly, like that was the answer he'd expected. "Well, if you decide to stay, you'll need help. This place has been empty for half a year. The well probably needs priming. The septic system is likely shot. And if you're planning to make it through winter, that roof won't hold." He gestured toward the house with his chin. "I've got tools and time. Your granddad helped me more than once when I needed it. Seems right to return the favor." I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe that people could help without wanting something in return, that kindness wasn't always a transaction. But the system had taught me different. It had taught me that help came with conditions, that nothing was free, that people kept score, and eventually they'd come to collect. "Why?" I asked, and my voice came out sharper than I meant it to. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Daniel's expression didn't change. He just shrugged. "Your granddad could have let my farm go under back in '09 when the banks were squeezing everyone. He didn't. He loaned me enough to make it through the season, told me to pay him back when I could. Took me 4 years, but I did. That's how it used to work around here, before everyone started treating neighbors like competition." He spit again, then met my eyes. "So yeah, I'll help. Not because I know you, because I knew him, and because that's what you do." I stood there on that sagging porch, with dirt under my nails and a box full of gold, hidden inside a house that was falling apart. And I made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe I'd regret it. But I was tired of doing everything alone, tired of carrying weight I wasn't strong enough to lift by myself. "Okay," I said. I could use the help. Daniel nodded once, sharp and final, like we'd just shaken hands on a contract. "I'll come by tomorrow morning. Bring some supplies. Take a look at what needs doing first. You got food, water?" I shook my head. "There's a general store 2 miles toward town," he said. "Tell Betty I sent you. She'll put it on credit until you get settled. And Marcus," I looked up, "don't let anyone pressure you into selling before you're ready. There's people around here who've been waiting for this land to go on the market. They'll come with smiles and contracts and numbers that sound good until you realize they're robbing you blind. You hear anything about developers or investment groups, you come talk to me first. Understand?" I understood. I understood that whatever my grandparents had hidden, whatever secrets this land held, other people knew about it too, or suspected. And they were waiting to see if I was smart enough to hold on to it or desperate enough to let it go. Daniel left, his truck rattling back down the driveway, and I went inside. The box was still on the living room floor, wrapped in the tarp, radiating a kind of heat that had nothing to do with temperature. I opened it again and pulled out the letters. They were old, the paper yellowed and brittle, addressed to Samuel Webb from different people, different years. I chose one at random and carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind taught in schools that didn't exist anymore. "Dear Sam," it read, "I'm writing to thank you for what you did for our family last winter. When the bank foreclosed and we thought we'd lose everything, you were the only one who stepped up. The money you loaned us saved the farm, saved our home, saved my children from seeing their father break. I know you said not to worry about paying it back, that you were just passing on a kindness someone once showed you, but I can't live with that kind of debt. Enclosed is the first payment. It's not much, but it's what I can spare. I'll send more when I can. You're a good man, Sam. Better than this world deserves. Sincerely, Thomas Brennan." I read another and another. They were all the same. Stories of people my grandfather had helped, loans he'd given, debts he'd forgiven. And as I read, I started to understand. The gold hadn't just been hidden to keep it safe. It had been used carefully and quietly to hold this community together when everything else was trying to tear it apart. My grandfather had found something valuable, and instead of hoarding it or spending it on himself, he'd turned it into a kind of safety net, a way to catch people when they fell. And now it was mine, not just the gold, but the responsibility. The weight of continuing something I hadn't started, of being the kind of person who helped instead of taking, who built instead of burning down. I folded the letters carefully and put them back in the box. Then I locked it, hid it under a loose floorboard in what used to be a bedroom, and went to find the general store. Betty turned out to be a woman in her 60s, with hair dyed an improbable shade of red and a smile that showed too many teeth. She looked me over when I walked in, eyes sharp and assessing, and I knew she was adding up everything about me in the span of a heartbeat. Age, clothes, the way I held myself like I was expecting to be told to leave. "You're the Webb boy," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Daniel called, said you'd be coming by." She didn't wait for me to respond, just started moving through the narrow aisles, pulling items off shelves. Bread, peanut butter, canned soup, instant coffee, bottled water. She piled everything on the counter, then grabbed a pad of paper and wrote down numbers in a column. "Comes to $47, she said. "But Daniel vouched for you, and your granddad had credit here for 20 years and never missed a payment. So you can pay me when you're able." I wanted to argue, to tell her I didn't need charity, but my stomach was empty and my pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. She bagged everything and handed it over, then leaned across the counter. "Word of advice," she said, voice lower. "You've got people watching you. Some of them are hoping you succeed. Some of them are hoping you fail so they can swoop in and buy that land for nothing. Be smart about who you trust." I carried the bags back to the farm as the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that made the ruins look almost beautiful. I ate peanut butter straight from the jar and drank water that tasted like plastic, and I thought about trust, about community, about the difference between being alone and being lonely. I'd been alone my whole life, passed between strangers who were paid to care, living in rooms that were never mine, eating food that was never made with me in mind. But lonely was different. Lonely was what happened when you realized that being alone was a choice you'd made because you didn't know how to do anything else. That night, I went back out to the map and marked the second X, the creek. I'd go there in the morning, dig up whatever was buried, and figure out what to do next. But as I lay on the floor wrapped in a blanket I'd found in a closet, listening to the house settle and creak around me, I realized something. I wasn't just digging up gold. I was digging up a life. My grandparents' life, the choices they'd made, the people they'd helped, the legacy they'd tried to build. And now I had to decide what to do with it. Keep it buried and safe, or bring it into the light and risk losing everything. The decision felt too big for someone like me. Someone who'd spent 19 years being told what to do, where to go, who to be. But I was 21 now, an adult, at least on paper. And this farm, this ruin, this strange inheritance, it was mine. For better or worse, it was mine. The next morning, Daniel showed up at dawn with a truck full of tools and a thermos of coffee he didn't offer to share. We spent the day fixing what could be fixed quickly. He patched the worst holes in the roof with tarps and nails, showed me how to prime the well pump until water sputtered out rust-colored and then clear. We cleared debris from the porch, shored up the supports, and by the time the sun was setting again, the house looked less like it was dying and more like it was just tired. "You're stronger than you look," Daniel said, as we loaded his tools back into the truck. "Your granddad would have liked that." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. After he left, I grabbed the shovel and headed for the creek. The creek was farther than it looked on the map, cutting through the southern edge of the property where the land dipped into a shallow ravine. The water was low this time of year, barely more than a trickle over smooth stones, but I could see the high water marks on the banks, where spring runoff would have turned it into something wild. The second X was supposed to be near a lightning-struck oak, and I found it exactly where the map said it would be, a massive tree split down the middle, one half blackened and dead, the other still clinging to green. 5 feet deep, the map had said. I started digging. The soil here was different, softer, rich with sediment the creek had deposited over years of flooding. The shovel bit easily at first, but then I hit clay, dense and sticky, clinging to the blade and my boots. I dug until my shoulders burned and my hands throbbed despite the gloves, until sweat ran into my eyes and made the world shimmer. And then, just when I thought maybe the map was wrong, Maybe time had shifted things. The shovel struck metal with a hollow clang that echoed across the water. This box was bigger than the first, the size of a small chest, and heavier. It took me 20 minutes to work it free from the clay and drag it up onto the bank. The lock was the same style, and the same key opened it with a grinding click that sounded like a door opening in my chest. Inside were more gold bars, smaller this time, but more of them, stacked in rows and wrapped in cloth that had rotted away in places. And beneath the gold, another bundle of letters. But these were different. These were addressed to Lorraine, not Samuel, and they were in a woman's handwriting that slanted to the left like it was always in a hurry. I opened one carefully. "Dear Lorraine," it read, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. When Michael got sick and we couldn't afford the treatments, when the insurance company denied us and the hospital started talking about payment plans we'd never be able to keep up with, I thought we were finished. I thought I'd have to watch my husband die because we didn't have enough money to save him. But you came to us with that envelope, with more money than I'd ever seen, and you told us it was a gift, not a loan. You said someone had once helped you when you needed it most, and you were just passing it forward. Michael's in remission now. The doctors say he has a good chance, and it's because of you. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of person you are. With love and gratitude, Ellen Porter." I sat on the bank with the letters in my lap and the water whispering past and something breaking open inside me that I didn't have a name for. My grandparents hadn't just helped people keep their farms. They'd saved lives. They'd taken something that could have made them rich and used it to stop other people from drowning. And they'd done it quietly, without wanting credit, without keeping score. I thought about the system I'd grown up in, the way it counted everything, the way every meal and every bed and every piece of clothing was logged and tracked, the way you always knew exactly how much you owed and how little you had. And I thought about what it would mean to live differently, to give without keeping ledgers, to help because you could, not because you expected something back. I closed the letters and put them back in the chest. Then I locked it, covered it with the tarp and dragged it back toward the house as the last light bled out of the sky. I was halfway there when I heard the sound of an engine, loud and out of place, coming fast down the dirt road. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the driveway and stopped near the mailbox, blocking the only way out. 2 men got out, both wearing suits that looked expensive and wrong against the backdrop of fields and falling down buildings. The first man was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The second was younger, built like he spent a lot of time in a gym, and he didn't smile at all. "Marcus Webb," the older man called out, walking toward me with his hand extended like we were meeting at a business lunch instead of in the dirt outside a ruin. "My name is Preston Vance. I represent Hartwell Development Group. We've been trying to reach you." I didn't take his hand. I just stood there with the shovel still in my grip and the tarp-wrapped chest 20 feet behind me, hoping they couldn't see it in the failing light. "I'm not interested in selling," I said. Preston's smile widened. "Of course not. You just got here. You're still figuring things out. But let me save you some time, Marcus. This property has significant tax liens against it. The county is going to start foreclosure proceedings within the month if those aren't paid. You're looking at what, 8,000? 9? That's a lot of money for someone in your position. Someone in your position." There was that phrase again, the one that meant poor, desperate, disposable. The one that meant they thought they could wait me out. "I'll figure it out," I said. The younger man stepped forward, and his voice was flat, professional, bored. "Mr. Webb, we're offering you $60,000 for the property as is. That's more than fair market value for land in this condition. You pay off the liens, walk away with 50, and you don't have to worry about maintaining a place you don't know how to fix. It's a good deal. It would have been a good deal once. Before I'd found the letters, before I'd understood what this place was, what it meant, what my grandparents had tried to build. I'm not selling," I said again, and this time my voice didn't shake. Preston's smile finally faded. "Marcus, I'm trying to help you. You're 21 years old with no job, no family, no resources. You think you can hold on to this place? You think you can pay the taxes and fix the house and make it work? You're going to fail. And when you do, we'll still be here, but the offer will be lower, much lower. Then I guess I better not fail, I said. Something passed between the two men, a look I couldn't quite read. Then Preston reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to me. When you change your mind, and you will, call me. The offer's good for 2 weeks. After that, we move on to other opportunities. They got back in the SUV and left, the engine's roar fading into the distance until all I could hear was the wind and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stood there until I was sure they were gone. Then I dragged the chest the rest of the way to the house and hid it with the first one under the floorboards. 2 boxes. 2 caches of gold, and 1 more still buried somewhere near the house. I had enough to pay the liens. Probably enough to fix the roof and the well and get through the winter. But I also had a choice to make. I could take the gold and use it the way my grandparents had, carefully and quietly, to help people who needed it. Or I could sell the land, take Preston's money, and walk away from all of this before it buried me. That night, I sat on the porch with the map spread out in front of me and a flashlight balanced on my knee, staring at the 3rd X. It was marked near the house, in what the map labeled as garden plot, at a depth of 4 feet. I could dig it up tomorrow. I could find out exactly how much my grandparents had left me, but I already knew the answer to the only question that mattered. It wasn't about how much. It was about what I did with it. At dawn, Daniel came back with more supplies and a neighbor I hadn't met, a woman named Sarah who owned the feed store in town and remembered my grandmother with the kind of fondness that comes from real friendship, not obligation. They worked alongside me without asking questions, without expecting explanations, and by the end of the day, the house had electricity again and running water that didn't taste like rust. That evening, more people came. Thomas Brennan, whose letter I'd read, showed up with his son and a load of firewood. Ellen Porter brought groceries and a casserole that was still warm. A man named Jack Morales came with his tools and spent 3 hours fixing the front door so it closed properly. They didn't ask about the gold. They didn't mention the rumors that must have been spreading through town about the Webb kid and the property and what he might have found. They just helped. And when they left, Thomas put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your granddad believed in taking care of people. Looks like you might too." I dug up the 3rd cache the next morning, alone, in the overgrown garden plot behind the house. 4 feet down, exactly where the map said, I found the smallest box yet. Inside were more letters, more stories, more proof of a life spent giving instead of taking, and at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a journal. My grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, dates spanning 30 years, entries about who they'd helped and why, about the drought and the recession and the neighbors who'd lost everything, and how the gold had been their way of fighting back against a system that valued profit over people. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before she died. "If Marcus ever finds this," it read, "I hope he understands that wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give away. And family isn't just blood, it's the people you choose to stand beside when everything else falls apart. We chose him, even from a distance, even without being able to hold him. He was always ours, and now this is his. I hope he makes it better than we did." I closed the journal and sat in the dirt with my back against the house and my face turned toward the sun, and I made my decision. I would stay. I would fix this place. I would pay the liens and stabilize the house and figure out how to work land I didn't understand yet, and I would use what my grandparents left me the way they'd used it, to help people, to build something that mattered more than money. It wouldn't be easy. It probably wouldn't even be smart, but it would be mine. 3 months later, the farm had a new roof and a working furnace and a garden plot that Daniel's wife helped me turn over and plant with winter vegetables. The liens were paid. Preston Vance stopped calling. And on a Saturday in January, when the first real snow fell and turned everything into something clean and new, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched smoke rise from the chimneys of houses I could barely see through the trees. Houses belonging to people I was starting to know, starting to call neighbors, and I felt something I'd never felt before. I felt like I belonged, not because of blood or documents or inheritance, but because I'd chosen to stay and they'd chosen to let me. If you made it all the way here, thank you, really. This story is about more than gold or farms or grandparents who leave cryptic maps. It's about what happens when you realize that the things you inherit aren't always what you expect, and that sometimes the most valuable legacy is just knowing that someone believed in you enough to leave you a chance. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about your own inheritance, whether that's land or trauma or hope or all three at once, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, and drop a comment below. Tell me, what's the most important thing someone ever left you? It doesn't have to be money or property. Sometimes it's just a lesson or a way of seeing the world, or the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. I read every comment and I promise you your story matters. Now go build something that lasts.